Welcome to Downey High School's online history class. I'm your instructor, Ms. Lojano, and today we are going to be talking about the differences between President Hoover and President FDR in the ways that they approached solving Great Depression problems. So we are going to start with President Hoover, who was president at the beginning of the Depression. He was elected in 1928, right at the height of the stock market, inaugurated in 29, and then October of 1929 is when the stock crash hit. So poor guy, happy birthday to Hoover. Here you go, have a massive depression and try to fix it. So as I mentioned, Hoover is a Republican, which during this period means that he adopted a small government philosophy. That means that he was basing his economic theory on Adam Smith, who talked a lot about laissez-faire capitalism. I'm sure you've heard that before, where the government's supposed to keep their hands off. And the idea there is that the economy will eventually recover on its own. Adam Smith talked about an invisible hand that helped fix the economy through laws of supply and demand. So if you're going to help anybody, then who you should help is businesses, because if the businesses recover, people have jobs. And this is a small government philosophy. It requires less intervention on behalf of government to try to turn around depressions. Now, let's look at a graph over here. So this, what we see at the top right here, that is the business cycle. This is what Adam Smith talks about as being like a typical normal business cycle, and the government is supposed to just stay out of it and let the business cycle correct itself, right? That is pure capitalism. Okay, now the problem is that in this situation, the peak to the trough is a long way down, right? So this isn't actually the business cycle. I'll show you a business cycle one later. This is the stock crash, but you can see this is like you're riding, sorry about that noise. Okay, you're riding a kind of a bobsled to hell here, right? For 4 years of drop. And so what happens is Hoover's slower approach, his idea that things will correct themselves, eventually becomes untenable as the depression becomes worse and worse. And so people are going to say, we want to try a different method. All right, so let's talk about how this depression deepens and mounting protest. Probably the low point of President Hoover's career was the bonus army. So you can see in the text on there, the bonus army was when World War I veterans marched on Washington, D.C., demanding their bonus money. So essentially, World War I veterans had been promised that they would be given bonuses. And these bonuses were still to come later in their lives. And they decided, we are not going to live to this later point in our lives. We need that bonus money now. And so a whole bunch of veterans got together, marched to Washington, D.C., hung out in front of the White House, like, hey, guys, when are you going to give us our money? Which obviously looks terrible, right? It looks like Hoover is neglecting World War I veterans. And eventually, when the veterans were cleared out, that turned into a whole escapade. The headlines from that were Hoover attacks World War I veterans, right? So this is kind of the low point of President Hoover's career and demonstrates the level of frustration that we're seeing from the citizenry. Okay, the other thing that we're going to see is the citizens start calling these camps where homeless people live Hoovervilles. They're named them after President Hoover because they felt like he wasn't doing enough to help them. We talked about previously in this class that by 1932, unemployment hit 25%. And at that point, 2 million people were experiencing homelessness. So you can see in this picture over here, right, this is a little sarcastic, Hoover's Poor Farm Tobacco Fund. Hard times are still hoovering over us, right? So the citizenry is getting frustrated and they're feeling like the government isn't doing enough to help them. Okay, so just a couple other pictures. Here you can see a woman traveling with her belongings. We can imagine that these are probably migrant people that have been potentially misplaced from their homes in the Great Plains. Here you can see other people trying to live out of their cars as a result of this homelessness situation. Okay, so per Hoover's small government philosophy, if you help anyone, who are you supposed to help? That's right, business. Okay, so by 1933, Hoover creates what's called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which gave loans to banks, railroads, and businesses to try to help them deal with the Depression. And the idea was that if the businesses, the banks, and the railroads recovered, then that would also help the average citizen, right? If a business is open, the average citizen has a job, which means they have income. This is often referred to as trickle-down economic theory or supply-side economics. Reagan also popularizes this theory in the 80s. Okay, so you can see that over here, right? This is a cartoon that's actually kind of critical of this theory. They're saying like, yeah, you put a bunch in the top, by the time it gets to the bottom, there's not enough left for other people. Okay, so although Hoover is attempting to try to help at this point, it's just, to most people, it feels like a little bit too little, too late. Okay, so I want to show you the impact of this on the election. Okay, so look at this. This is the 1928 election. This is when Hoover was elected. Okay, so remember, Hoover is the red. He's a Republican. You can see this is a pretty solid election victory. Also note that the Democrats are in the South. This is a different party system than the one that we are currently in. And actually, 1932 is going to launch the fifth party system when we're going to see a new coalition build around the Democratic Party. But take a look at this. Okay, so hello, Hoover, very popular. 1932, nope. This is one of the largest landslide elections in U.S. history. And FDR wins the 1936 election with even more margin than this one. Okay, so you can see the country is saying, like, not enough, Hoover. Now, to be fair to Hoover, presidents have limited power in solving these kinds of economic crises, but the general perception of the citizenry was, you didn't do enough to help us, so let's try somebody else. Okay, so 1933, FDR is inaugurated after he wins in that landslide election, and he's going to be president until 1945. FDR is a Democrat. Obviously, he was running against Hoover, the Republican candidate, or the Republican president at the time. Okay, now I did want to point this out really quick. 33 to 45, that is 12 years. That is no longer possible. FDR is the only president in U.S. history elected to 4 terms. He actually died early in his 4th term. And after that, an amendment was added to the Constitution to say, nope, 2 terms or 10 years, that's all you get, buddy. So he should be, barring any other amendments, the last president to have ever served that long. Essentially, he ends up serving through the Depression and World War II. Okay, now when FDR comes in, he has a bigger government philosophy based on an economist who was popular at the time, named John Maynard Keynes. And Keynes advocated this idea that the government should intervene to try to remedy some of these issues with the slide. So rather than being laissez-faire and letting the business cycle correct, the government should institute policies to try to make these changes happen faster. Now, I want to direct your attention to this graph at the bottom down here. So you can see this is the business cycle, U.S. business cycle since 1914. That's the beginning of World War I through the 90s. Okay, and you can see it's pretty typical, right? You've got your like growth, peak, drop, trough. Okay, hello, Great Depression though, right? Like this is just, oh, we talked about the bobsled to hell. This is it. And in fact, I mean, you can see, right? This is FDR when he comes in and he's fixing some of this. But even then, this is what we call a double dip depression. Even his ideas do not fix the depression. We have another dip here, and it's actually World War II that fully pulls us out of the depression. Now, what John Maynard Keynes said was, yeah, the business cycle will turn around, but this fall is going to kill you. Right. So instead, the government should try to pump money into the economy to try to flip this earlier so that you're not sliding so long. And we can see those philosophies still implemented today. Right. I'm sure you guys heard. Well, maybe you didn't. Under President Trump, there was a COVID relief bill, right, where they sent out stimulus payments to families, and they're working on a bill right now to do that again. It looks like most people are going to get $1,400. Okay, that is a Keynesian idea, right? We give the people money and they pump it into the economy and it turns the economy around. Okay, now the other piece of FDR's idea, not just he's a bigger government saying that we should intervene directly, But he's also going to be very experimental. Okay, so that brings us to this Mike Trout picture. So in his fireside chats, which FDR used to give, they were basically radio addresses directly to the American people. What he said is, we're playing baseball here. Okay, so if you follow baseball at all, you know a very good batting average is about 33%, right? This is, okay, sorry, Dodger fans. Okay, but this is Angels player Mike Trout, won 2018 Player of the Year. And in that year, look at his batting average, 0.312. That means you hit 1 out of 3 every at bats, and that's awesome. Okay, so what FDR said was, look, people, we're playing baseball. We're going to try a whole bunch of stuff. Maybe a third of it will work. We're going to call that a win. Okay, so this was his way of lowering people's expectations. Some people are still going to be very critical of this. They're going to say, what? Like 2/3 can not work and that still counts. They're going to view that as very wasteful. But that was what he attempted. He said, look, we just got to try something, right? So we're going to take an experimental approach with a bigger government philosophy. Okay, last part. So FDR introduces his program, which he called the New Deal, to try to deal with Great Depression problems. And later on in the week, you're going to look at some of these specific programs. Many of these have become the presidential toolkit for how they think about dealing with recessions and depressions currently. So these were his 3 goals. Number 1, relief, direct help for the poor. Okay, so this is essentially like people are starving. They need cash, right? So he says, we are going to fix that. We're going to stop the bleeding. We're going to do soup kitchens. We're going to give people direct money. This is the first time the US government has ever done that, just like straight up welfare type payments. Also, we're going to hire people to do a whole bunch of jobs for the government. Okay, so that is the relief part. Stop the bleeding, put some money in your hands. Okay, step 2, we call recovery. Okay, and recovery is meant to help businesses and farmers get back on their feet. So this would be more similar to how Hoover thought about solving the Depression, right? We need to get businesses and farmers back up. And that's going to look like, it could look like loans to businesses. It could look like paying farmers not to farm for a while to try to get rid of some of the surplus. Okay, so that is step 2, get the businesses and farmers back on their feet. Step 3 is reform. And the idea behind reform was that we needed to fix these problems so another depression won't happen. Okay, so that includes like somebody to regulate the stock market, which we now have. That's called the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. You can see on the left, pictured here, this is FDIC insurance. That is bank insurance on private accounts, so that if your bank goes under, you do not lose your life savings, right? These are all long-term fixes to try to make sure that the Great Depression never happens again. Okay, so as I mentioned, later in the week, you're going to look at some specific programs. Remember, we're going to remember this as the 3 R's, okay? Relief, recovery, reform. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Hope you guys have a great day.